30 years. It's a lifetime. It's a tapestry woven with a million shared moments of laughter, of tears, of raising children, of growing old together. For Carol, sitting across from her husband Richard, on the night of their 30th wedding anniversary, that tapestry felt like a warm, protective blanket. She had brought a small, gift-wrapped box with her, a new watch to replace the one he'd had for years. The evening was meant to be a quiet celebration of their enduring love, a testament to the life they had built. But underneath that warm blanket, a single cold thread had been bothering her for years, a small, persistent question she had never dared to ask aloud. Tonight, feeling emboldened by the champagne and the weight of 3 decades, she decided it was time. After he had opened his gift, she took a deep breath. "Richard, my love," she began, her voice soft. "There's something I've always wondered. Why? Why don't you ever wear your wedding ring?" The question hung in the air between them, suddenly heavier than the entire 30 years. Richard didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He just smiled. It was a strange, distant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He took a sip of his champagne, looked at her, and delivered the words that would shatter her world. "Because," he said, his voice calm and casual, as if commenting on the weather, "she doesn't like it when I wear it." She. The word was a gunshot in the quiet restaurant. It was not the answer to a question, it was the confirmation of a nightmare. In that single, terrifying syllable, Carol understood that she was not the only person in her marriage, and she hadn't been for a very, very long time. A simple answer that confirmed the existence of her, a woman with the power to veto the most sacred symbol of their union. But Carol had no idea that a simple affair was the least of his betrayals. The real truth, a truth that would unravel the very fabric of their reality, was locked away in a secret safe in his home office. And the answer to "who is she?" was far more horrifying than she could ever have imagined. To truly comprehend the devastation of that single cruel sentence, you have to understand the 30 years of perceived peace that came before it. You have to walk through the rooms of the life Carol believed she had built. Carol and Richard's love story was not a whirlwind romance or a dramatic, passionate epic. It was something she considered far more real, far more precious. It was a quiet, sturdy, and deeply comfortable thing, like a well-loved armchair that has molded itself to your shape over thousands of shared evenings. It was a life built not on grand gestures, but on the small, consistent bricks of everyday devotion. They had met in college, 2 bright-eyed kids with a shared optimistic vision for the future. She was studying to be an art teacher, a woman with a gentle soul and a gift for seeing the hidden potential in a shapeless lump of clay. He was a driven, ambitious architecture student, a man who saw the world in terms of lines, structures, and solid foundations. They were a perfect complement. She taught him the beauty of imperfection. He gave her a sense of unshakable stability. Theirs was a love story written in library study sessions, shared pizzas in cheap apartments, and whispered dreams about the future. And they built that future, exactly as planned. They bought a lovely 2-story house in a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood, the kind with a big oak tree in the front yard perfect for a tire swing. There, they raised 2 wonderful children, a son, Mark, and a daughter, Lisa. Carol became the heart of that home, and the heart of her local high school's art department. She was the kind of teacher students remembered for a lifetime, the one who encouraged their wildest creative impulses and provided a safe, non-judgmental space for them to be themselves. Her classroom, much like her home, was a sanctuary of warmth and acceptance. Richard, in turn, became the provider he had always vowed to be. His architectural firm flourished. He designed beautiful, practical buildings, community centers, libraries, and comfortable family homes that became a respected part of the city's landscape. He was a good father, a devoted husband, or so it seemed to the entire world, including his own wife. He worked hard, yes, often long, grueling hours, but he always justified it with a noble weightiness in his voice. "I'm building a future for us, Carol, for the kids. So you never have to worry about a thing." And she believed him. She honored his long hours as a form of sacrifice, a testament to his love for them. Their home was the gravitational center of their extended family. It was famous for Carol's legendary Sunday pot roasts and the sound of Richard's booming, infectious laughter echoing through the halls during holiday gatherings. They were the couple everyone looked up to, the gold standard of a happy, enduring marriage. To their friends, to their children, and most importantly, to Carol herself, their bond seemed as solid and unshakable as the foundations of the buildings Richard designed. Carol was a woman who found her deepest happiness not in grand adventures, but in the small, repeated rituals of a shared life. The way Richard always made her a perfect cup of coffee in the morning, just the way she liked it, and left it on her bedside table before he left for work. The comfortable, companionable silence they could share for hours while reading in the living room on a rainy Sunday afternoon. The thousands of inside jokes and shared memories that formed the secret, untranslatable language of their long and intimate marriage. She was not a suspicious woman by nature. Trust, for her, was not something that needed to be earned and re-earned daily. It was the very air their marriage breathed. She believed in the fundamental goodness of her husband, in the sturdiness of the life they had built, with the same quiet, unwavering faith that she believed the sun would rise in the morning. She was the heart of their family, the emotional center that held everyone and everything together. Richard was the strong, steady provider, the logical mind, the public face of their success. He was a man's man, practical and not overly sentimental, but she never for a moment doubted his love. He would bring her flowers on their anniversary, always her favorite stargazer lilies. He would remember the name of an obscure painter she'd mentioned in passing and surprise her with a book about their work. He would reach for her hand during tense moments in a movie. These small, consistent acts were the proof, the irrefutable evidence she used to build the case for their perfect, happy life. Their children, now grown and with families of their own, saw their parents' marriage as a rock, an institution, the model for their own relationships. "I just want to love like Mom and Dad's," their daughter Lisa had said in a toast at her own wedding, her eyes misty. It was a sentiment shared by everyone who knew them. They were a living testament to commitment, to partnership, to the quiet, everyday work of building a life with another human being. Looking back from the wreckage of that terrible night, Carol would later realize how much of that perfection was a story she had willfully told herself. She had so desperately wanted to believe in the beautiful tapestry they had woven together that she had intentionally, subconsciously, ignored the frayed threads at the edges, the small, discolored patches that didn't quite fit the pattern. She had mistaken Richard's frequent emotional distance for the quiet preoccupation of a busy, important man. She had mistaken his obsessive secrecy about his finances and his projects for a simple desire for privacy. She had accepted every single explanation, every vague excuse, because the alternative, that the life she had poured her entire soul and identity into was not what it seemed, was simply too terrifying, too catastrophic to even contemplate. For 30 years, she had lived in a beautiful, sturdy house of her own making, a house built on love and trust. She had no idea, not a single clue, that it was all built on a foundation of lies. The first visible crack in the foundation of Carol's perfect world appeared exactly 10 years and 1 week after their 20th wedding anniversary. It wasn't a dramatic, explosive event. It was a small, quiet absence, a tiny void that would grow over the next decade into a gaping chasm of doubt. It was the absence of Richard's wedding ring. For 20 years, that simple, solid gold band had been a permanent fixture on his left hand. It was a part of him, as familiar as the sound of his voice or the way he held his coffee cup. He wore it with a quiet pride. Carol had given it to him on their wedding day, her hands trembling with youthful hope as she slid it onto his finger. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a circle of trust, a tangible symbol of the vows they had made, of the life they were building together. Then one Monday morning, it was gone. Carol noticed it immediately as he handed her a cup of coffee. The flash of gold she was so accustomed to seeing was replaced by the pale, untanned skin of his bare ring finger. The absence was jarring, like a missing tooth in a familiar smile. "Honey, where's your ring?" she asked, her voice light and casual, trying to mask the small, irrational flicker of panic in her chest. Richard didn't even look at her. He was busy reading the morning paper, his expression focused and distant. "Oh, I took it off," he said dismissively, his voice muffled by the newsprint. It was bothering me. Bothering you? She asked, a knot of confusion forming in her stomach. How? You've worn it every day for 20 years. He finally lowered the paper, an expression of mild annoyance on his face, as if she were questioning a completely logical decision. It gets in the way at work, Carol, he explained, his tone patient, as if speaking to a slightly slow child. I'm on site at the new construction project all this week. It's dirty, it's rough. The ring could get scratched, or worse, I could catch it on some machinery. It's just a safety issue. It's more practical to leave it at home. The explanation made perfect sense. It was logical. It was practical. Richard was, above all else, a practical man. But still, it felt wrong. It felt like a convenient excuse, a thin veil over a different, unspoken truth. Carol looked at his hand, at the pale, naked finger, and felt a chill she couldn't explain. Okay, she said softly, not wanting to seem like a nagging wife. Just don't forget where you put it. It's in the little dish on my dresser, he said, already raising the newspaper, the conversation clearly over. Don't worry about it. But she did worry. She worried all week. She found herself glancing at his left hand constantly, the absence of the ring a constant, silent shout in their quiet home. The construction project ended, but the ring did not return to his finger. A week turned into a month. The excuse shifted. Now it was, I'm doing a lot of detailed drafting, and it feels cumbersome. Then it was, I've been playing golf with clients, and it affects my swing. The excuses were always plausible, always logical, but their sheer number began to form a pattern of avoidance. She tried to bring it up one more time, a few months later. Richard, she said gently one evening, I miss seeing your ring on your finger. It was important to me. It's a symbol. This time, his reaction wasn't just dismissive, it was angry. For God's sake, Carol, are we going to talk about this again? He snapped, his voice sharp. It's a piece of metal. My commitment to you isn't defined by a stupid ring. It's defined by this house, by the life I provide for you, by the fact that I come home to you every single night. Isn't that enough? This is childish. The accusation of being childish stung her deeply. It was designed to make her feel foolish, to shame her into silence. And it worked. She never mentioned the ring again. She accepted the new reality. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that her husband's love wasn't contained in a circle of gold. But a small, wounded part of her heart knew that when he had taken off that ring, he had taken off a piece of their marriage, a piece of his commitment, and had put it away in a dish on his dresser, where it gathered dust along with other things he no longer had a use for. The missing ring became the first great unspoken truth in their marriage, a silent symbol of a distance she could feel but could not name. And it was the beginning of a new chapter in their life together, a chapter defined by his increasing secrecy and her growing, unacknowledged unease. It was as if the removal of the ring had given him a kind of permission, a psychological freedom to begin building a life where he wasn't entirely hers. The pale, untanned skin on his finger was a blank canvas, a space where a new story, a secret story, could one day be written. And for the next 10 years, Carol would live with that blank space, that quiet void, trying with all her might to pretend it wasn't there, trying to convince herself that the beautiful tapestry of their life together wasn't slowly, silently, and irrevocably unraveling. The 10 years that followed the disappearance of the wedding ring were a masterclass in quiet, creeping alienation. Richard never left, not physically. He still came home every night, still sat at the head of the dinner table, still played the part of the devoted husband, but it was a performance, a masterful, and in hindsight, a deeply cruel one. He was a ghost in his own home, his body present but his spirit, his true self, residing elsewhere. And the evidence of this other life, this secret world he inhabited, began to accumulate like dust in the forgotten corners of their marriage, small and insignificant at first, but eventually forming a thick, suffocating layer of doubt. The business trips were the most obvious and painful red flag. They began subtly, a weekend architectural conference in a nearby city, a necessary on-site visit to a project out of state. The excuses were always professional, always plausible, but over the years, their frequency and their nature began to change. The trips became more frequent, sometimes 2 or 3 a month, and they almost always fell over a weekend. Carol, a woman who had always been a part of his professional life, was never invited. "It's all work, honey," he'd say with a dismissive wave of his hand. You'd be bored to tears. He started traveling to one small, unremarkable city in particular, a place with no architectural significance, over and over again. When she asked why he had to go there so often, his explanation was always vague. "It's a very demanding client with a long-term development project. Very high maintenance." He never offered a name. He never shared a detail. It was a locked room in his life, and she was not given a key. Then there was the money. Richard had always managed their finances, a task Carol was happy to relinquish, but she began to notice anomalies she couldn't ignore. Large, regular cash withdrawals from their joint account, always for the same amount, always on a Friday. When she gently questioned him, he became defensive. "It's for project expenses, Carol. Subcontractors, material deposits. A lot of these guys prefer cash." "It's just the cost of doing business." It sounded reasonable, but it felt wrong. Why would a successful architect be dealing in large sums of cash like a back-alley bookie? She also noticed new credit card statements arriving from a bank they had never used before. They were always addressed to his office, but one was mistakenly delivered to their home. Before she could even look at it, he snatched it from her hand, his face a mask of panic. "Junk mail," he'd muttered, tearing it into tiny pieces. "They're just trying to get you to sign up." But his reaction was not the reaction of a man throwing away junk mail. It was the reaction of a man hiding a secret. His relationship with his phone also transformed. It became a third person in their marriage, an appendage he was never without. It was always in his pocket, on the table beside him, or clutched in his hand. It was password protected, something it had never been before. He would often receive text messages at odd hours, late at night or early in the morning. He would read them with a small, secret smile, his fingers flying across the screen in a rapid reply. If she ever walked into the room while he was on a call, he would immediately lower his voice to a hushed murmur or end the call abruptly. "Just a contractor," he'd say, his eyes avoiding hers. "You know how they are." The phone became a wall between them, a constant, glowing symbol of a world she was not a part of. The intimacy they once shared was now being shared with a 6-inch screen. The emotional distance was perhaps the most painful red flag of all. The man she had married, a man of booming laughter and warm embraces, was slowly replaced by a tenant, a polite but distant stranger who shared her house. Their comfortable silences, once filled with a shared understanding, were now heavy with unspoken words. Their conversations became transactional, focused on household logistics. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? The lawn needs mowing rather than their inner lives. He stopped asking about her day at school, about her art, about her thoughts and feelings. He seemed uninterested. He would often seem tired, distracted, his mind a million miles away. She would be talking to him, and she could see that he wasn't really listening, just nodding along, waiting for her to finish. She felt herself becoming invisible, a piece of the furniture in the beautiful house he had designed. And there were the small, inexplicable moments of cruelty. He forgot their 25th wedding anniversary, not just the date, but the entire event. She had planned a special dinner, and he had simply not come home, calling late to say he was stuck on a late-night project. He showed up the next morning with no apology, seemingly having no idea what he had done until he saw the single, uneaten place setting still on the dining room table. Another time, she had been ill with a terrible flu. As she lay in bed, weak and miserable, he had announced that he still had to go on his business trip that weekend. "It's unavoidable, Carol. The client is expecting me." And he had left her there, alone, to fend for herself. These were not the actions of a forgetful or busy husband. They were the actions of a man whose emotional center of gravity had shifted, a man whose priorities no longer included her. Each of these moments was a small death, the slow, painful extinguishing of the love she thought was forever. And yet, she stayed. She stayed because the alternative, the idea of dismantling their 30 years of shared history, was too cataclysmic to comprehend. So she lived with the ghosts, with the red flags, with the cold, empty space on his finger, telling herself that this was just a phase, a difficult chapter in a long book. She had no idea she was already living in an epilogue, and that the true story of her husband's life was being written, page by page, in another city, with another woman. The soft, romantic piano music in the restaurant didn't stop. The other couples in the room continued to laugh and murmur, their conversations a meaningless, distant hum. But at Carol's table, a profound and chilling silence had fallen. It was a silence so absolute, so heavy, it felt like a physical presence. The single word, she, hung in the air between them. A ghost that had suddenly materialized, displacing the 30 years of memories that had once occupied that space. Carol stared at her husband, searching for some sign, any sign, that this was a joke, a cruel, tasteless, but ultimately meaningless joke. She looked for a flicker of humor in his eyes, a twitch at the corner of his mouth that would signal the punchline was coming, but she found none. Richard just sat there, looking at her with a calm, almost placid expression, as if he had just commented on the quality of the breadsticks. He took another deliberate sip of his champagne, the picture of a man completely at ease with the bomb he had just detonated in the middle of his own life. The initial shock, the feeling of the floor dropping away from beneath her, began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It was the adrenaline a body produces in a moment of crisis, a survival instinct. Her mind, usually a gentle, artistic place, was suddenly working with a lawyer's precision, analyzing the data she had just been given. He didn't say, "I'm having an affair." He said, "She doesn't like it when I wear it." The wording was specific. It wasn't about him. It was about the power of this other woman, a woman whose preference about a piece of jewelry outweighed 30 years of marriage vows. She finally found her voice, but it was a voice she didn't recognize. It was thin, steady, and completely devoid of the warmth it usually held. "She?" Carol asked, the word a simple, quiet echo of his own. "Who is she, Richard?" He had the audacity to look slightly annoyed, as if she were being impolite, pushing for details on a private matter. He sighed, a long, weary sound, as if her question was an immense burden. "Carol, let's not do this here," he said, his voice a low, warning murmur. He glanced around at the other tables. "This is our anniversary. Let's not ruin it." "Ruin it?" The words escaped her lips in a dry, humorless laugh. "Richard, I think you've already taken care of that. You've just informed me that a mysterious she has a vote in the policies of our marriage. I think I have a right to know who the other board member Island. Who is she?" Her voice was still quiet, but now there was an edge of cold, hard steel to it, a tone he had never heard from her before. He saw that she was not going to back down. His strategy shifted. He leaned forward, his expression changing to one of grave sincerity, the look of a man about to deliver a difficult but necessary truth. It was a performance, and she could see all the strings. "It's complicated, Carol," he began, his voice taking on a sad, patronizing tone. "It's not what you think. It's not some sordid little affair. It's a deep connection, a meeting of minds. She understands a part of me that you don't, that you can't." The condescension was breathtaking. He wasn't just admitting to a betrayal, he was blaming her for it. He was framing his infidelity as a consequence of her own inadequacy. "A part of you I can't understand?" she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "Richard, I have spent 30 years studying you. I know every line on your face, every story you tell, every dream you've ever had. I helped you build the firm that you now use to fund your deep connections. What part of you exactly have I failed to comprehend?" "The ambitious part," he shot back, his voice rising, a flash of genuine anger in his eyes. "The part that wants more than just this. This quiet, predictable suburban life. She's full of life, of energy. She challenges me. We talk about art, about philosophy, about the world. When was the last time we talked about anything other than the kids or the leak in the roof, Carol?" The accusation was so deeply unfair, it almost took her breath away. She had been the one to introduce him to art, to drag him to museums, to encourage his intellectual pursuits for decades. He had been the one who had slowly withdrawn, who had stopped sharing his thoughts, who had replaced their deep conversations with tired grunts from behind a newspaper. He was now accusing her of the very silence he himself had created. "So, you're saying," she said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time, "that for the last 10 years, while I thought you were on business trips, you were having philosophical discussions with this other woman?" "It's more than that, and you know it," he said, his cruelty now laid bare. He seemed to be enjoying it, enjoying the power of finally speaking his ugly truth. "Yes, there is someone else. Someone who makes me feel alive. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm slowly fading into a comfortable beige retirement. And yes, she doesn't like the ring. It makes her feel secondary. And she is not a secondary person in my life." There it was. The final, brutal admission. The other woman wasn't just a dalliance, she was a co-primary, an equal, or perhaps even a superior, partner in his life. The 30 years of marriage, the children, the shared history, it was all just the other life, the boring one he was forced to endure. Carol looked at the man sitting across from her, at his self-satisfied, unapologetic face, and she felt a profound and terrifying shift happen inside her. The love, the deep, abiding love she had nurtured for 30 years, did not just die. It was murdered, and in its place, something cold, hard, and unfamiliar began to grow. The pain was still there, a physical ache in her chest, but it was now accompanied by a sense of calm, a chilling and absolute clarity. The questions, the doubts, the years of quiet unease, they had all finally been answered. She was not paranoid. She was not childish. She was a woman who had been living a lie, and the lie was now over. She picked up her purse. She stood up. Her movements were slow, deliberate. "Where are you going?" Richard asked, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected tears, shouting, a scene. He had not expected this quiet, dignified departure. Carol looked down at him, not with anger, not with sadness, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a strange, unpleasant specimen. "I'm going home," she said, her voice even. "To the house you so generously provide for me. You can stay and enjoy your champagne. And please give her my regards." Carol walked out of the restaurant with a strange and unnerving sense of calm. The warm, buzzing atmosphere of the dining room, filled with the happy chatter of other people's lives, seemed to belong to a different planet. She moved through it like a ghost, unseen and unheard. The maitre d' smiled at her as she passed. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Dubois? Is your husband joining you shortly?" She just looked at him, her face a blank mask, and nodded, unable to form the words to explain that her husband, in a very real sense, no longer existed. The valet brought her car around, a comfortable, reliable sedan that suddenly felt cavernous and empty. As she got in, she saw Richard through the restaurant's large picture window. He hadn't followed her. He was still sitting at the table, a silhouette against the glittering city lights. He had picked up his champagne flute and was staring into it, his expression unreadable from a distance. He was not coming after her. He was letting her go. That single, simple fact was more painful than any of the cruel words he had spoken inside. The drive home was a 20-minute journey that felt like an eternity. The familiar streets of the city she had lived in her entire life seemed alien, the traffic lights and storefronts blurring into a meaningless stream of color. She drove with a mechanical precision, her hands steady on the wheel, her foot applying just the right amount of pressure to the accelerator, but inside her mind, a hurricane was raging. The same scene from the restaurant played on a relentless, torturous loop. His smile, his calm, dismissive tone, the casual, devastating cruelty of the word she. She tried to picture this other woman. Was she young, beautiful, a brilliant architect like him? Did she laugh at his jokes? Did she admire his work? Did her friends know that the brilliant, charming man she was with was married? That he had a wife of 30 years, a woman who was, at that very moment, driving home alone from their anniversary dinner? The questions were a swarm of angry hornets in her head, each one delivering a fresh, venomous sting. She pulled into the driveway of their beautiful, dark house, the house they had bought as a young, hopeful couple, the house where they had brought their babies home from the hospital, the house where every wall, every floorboard was saturated with the memories of their shared life. Tonight, for the first time, it did not feel like a home. It felt like a crime scene. She walked through the front door into the silent, empty foyer. The silence was a physical presence, pressing in on her from all sides. She could see the ghosts of their life everywhere she looked. The small scuff mark on the wall where a 7-year-old Mark had crashed his bicycle, the faint pencil marks on the doorframe, charting her daughter Lisa's growth from a tiny toddler to a towering teenager. These were the artifacts of a life she now had to question, a history that had been retroactively poisoned. Was he with her on the day Lisa graduated? Was he thinking of her on the Christmas mornings they had spent opening presents by the fire? The lie was not just in the present. It was a thief, reaching back in time and stealing the joy from her most precious memories. She walked into the living room and sank onto the sofa. She didn't turn on the lights. She just sat there in the dark, the silence of the house her only companion. She waited. A small, foolish part of her still expected the sound of his car in the driveway. She expected him to walk through the door with an apology, an explanation, a desperate plea for forgiveness. She expected him to fight for their 30 years of marriage. But the hours ticked by, and the silence remained unbroken. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from him. Her heart leaped with a pathetic, desperate hope. Maybe this was it. The apology. She fumbled for the phone, her hands shaking. The message was not an apology. It was a set of cold, practical instructions. It read, "Carol, I can see this is difficult for you. I think it's best if we have some space. I'm going to stay at the downtown apartment for a few days to let things cool off. Don't call me. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk." The downtown apartment. She knew the one he meant, the one the company kept for visiting executives. He called it the downtown apartment. She had a terrible, sinking feeling that she called it home, and the finality of his words, "Don't call me," was the last nail in the coffin. He wasn't just taking space. He was issuing a command. He was abandoning her. He was leaving her alone in the wreckage he had created, with instructions not to bother him while he went back to his other, more important life. The last flicker of hope died. The tears she had been holding back for hours finally came. She curled up on the sofa, the phone still clutched in her hand, and she wept. She wept for the young girl who had fallen in love with a promising young architect. She wept for the woman who had poured her entire soul into a marriage that had been a lie. And she wept for the stranger she now was, a 60-year-old woman sitting alone in the dark, her future a terrifying, unknown blank space. The pain was absolute, a physical weight that threatened to crush her, but as the first rays of dawn began to creep through the windows, something else began to stir within her. The tears began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard ember of rage. He thought he could just leave. He thought he could just issue a command, and she would obediently sit and wait. He thought he had all the power. He had forgotten about his office. He had forgotten about the one room in the house that was his alone. He had forgotten about the secret he kept locked away in the dark. He had forgotten about the safe. The tears eventually ran dry, leaving behind the raw, gritty emptiness of profound emotional exhaustion. Carol didn't move from the sofa. She watched the sunrise, the cheerful morning light streaming into the living room, feeling like a vulgar intrusion on her private grief. The birds began their morning chorus outside, their happy, oblivious songs an insult to the crushing silence inside the house. The world was waking up, moving on, just as it always did, completely indifferent to the fact that her own world had ended the night before. She felt a strange sense of disassociation, as if she were watching a movie about a sad, abandoned woman. She saw herself get up, her movements stiff and robotic. She saw herself walk into the kitchen and mechanically go through the motions of making coffee, just as she had done every morning for 30 years. She looked at the 2 coffee mugs sitting by the machine, his and hers, and a fresh wave of pain, so sharp and intense it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. With a sudden, violent motion, she swept his mug off the counter. It shattered on the tiled floor, the sound echoing through the silent house like a gunshot. It was the first act of rebellion, a small, satisfying crack in the placid facade of the woman she used to be. The shattered mug seemed to trigger something within her. The fog of grief began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp, and unfamiliar feeling. Fury. A righteous, energizing rage. How dare he? How dare he sit in that restaurant, after 30 years of her life, her love, her loyalty, and so calmly, so cruelly, dismiss it all for some unnamed she? How dare he then retreat to his secret life and command her, his wife, not to contact him? The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was a slap in the face. She was not some fragile, hysterical woman to be managed and placated. She was a partner. She had poured her soul into this family, into this house, into his success. She had a right to know. Not just a desire, but a fundamental, non-negotiable right to know the truth. The full, ugly, unvarnished truth. And it became clear to her, with a chilling certainty, that he would never give it to her willingly. If she wanted answers, she would have to find them herself. Her mind, once a gentle landscape of art and memory, was now a sharp, focused, tactical map. Where do secrets live in a house? They live in the dark, hidden places, in locked drawers, in the pockets of old coats, and in the one place in their entire home that had always been exclusively his, a place she was tacitly forbidden from entering without an invitation, his home office. She walked towards the closed oak door of his office, her heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. For 30 years, this door had been a symbol of respect for his privacy, his space to work and think. Now, it was a barrier, a locked gate behind which the truth was imprisoned. She turned the knob. It was unlocked. Of course it was. He was so confident in her obedience, in her respect for his boundaries, that he hadn't even bothered to lock the door behind him. The room was just as she had always seen it from the doorway, immaculate, impersonal, and smelling faintly of leather and paper. A large architect's desk dominated the space, its surface clear except for a sleek laptop and a neat stack of files. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not with the art books she loved, but with dense, technical volumes on building codes and structural engineering. It was the room of a man she barely knew. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for a clue. A lead? A locked filing cabinet? A hidden box? Tucked away in a custom-built bookshelf, partially obscured by a row of thick architectural binders, was the small, gray, metallic door of a wall safe. She had always known it was there. He had it installed years ago, for important client documents and company blueprints. He had explained, things that are too sensitive to leave lying around. It had seemed like a reasonable precaution for a successful architect. Now, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a vault where he kept his other life. She stood before it, her reflection a faint, distorted ghost on the cold steel door. This was the final boundary. To open this would be to commit an act of ultimate betrayal against the marriage she once knew. It was an admission that all trust was gone, that she was no longer his wife, but his adversary. The thought gave her a moment of pause. The woman she was yesterday would have backed away, horrified by her own actions. But the woman she was today was different. She had been forged in the fire of last night's betrayal. She thought of his casual cruelty, of his condescending smile, of the cold, dismissive text message. She thought of the 10 years of lies, of the missing ring, of the hollow feeling of being invisible in her own home. The hesitation vanished, burned away by the cold fire of her newfound rage. He had forfeited his right to privacy the moment he had introduced another woman into their marriage. She reached out and placed her hand on the keypad. The cool metal was a shock to her warm skin. She had no idea what the combination could be, but she knew her husband. She knew the arrogant, sentimental, and ultimately predictable man he was. He was a creature of habit and ego. The code wouldn't be random. It would be something meaningful only to him, something he believed was clever. She took a deep breath, the click of the keypad buttons echoing in the silent room, and she began to try the numbers that had defined his secret world. The small green light of the safe's keypad glowed in the dim light of the office, a single malevolent eye staring back at her. Carol's mind raced, sifting through the 30 years of data she had collected on the man she thought she knew. A combination lock, for a man like Richard, was not just a security measure. It was a statement of identity, a secret password to his soul. It would be a number that mattered to him, a date that held a private, significant meaning. Her first attempts were born from the life they had shared. She started with the obvious ones, her fingers trembling slightly as she keyed them in. Their wedding anniversary, the 15th of August 2094. The keypad beeped 3 times, a curt electronic rejection. She tried her own birthday. Beep, beep, beep. His birthday. Beep, beep, beep. She tried the birthdays of their children, Mark and then Lisa. Each attempt was met with the same impersonal, mocking triple beep. The message was clear. The key to his secret world had nothing to do with the family she thought was his everything. The realization was another small, sharp cut. She leaned her forehead against the cool, smooth steel of the safe door, closing her eyes. She tried to think not like his wife, but like him. Richard was a man of logic, of structures, of dates and projects. His entire identity was wrapped up in his work, in his success. The combination would be related to his professional life, the life he had used as a shield for so long. She thought back. What were the landmark dates of his career? The day he opened his own firm? She keyed in the numbers. Beep, beep, beep. The day he won the prestigious Harrison Award for architectural design? Beep, beep, beep. Frustration began to bubble up inside her, a hot, angry feeling. It felt like he was mocking her even now, his secrets protected by a wall of numbers she couldn't breach. She was about to give up, to concede defeat, when a stray memory surfaced, a memory so insignificant she had almost forgotten it. It was from a few years ago. She had been in the car with him, and he had been on one of his hushed, important-sounding phone calls. She hadn't been trying to eavesdrop, but she had overheard him dictating a set of numbers to the person on the other end. "Just confirm the project number for me," he had said. "It's 062214. She remembered it only because it seemed like a strange, random sequence, and he had repeated it twice. At the time, she had assumed it was exactly what he said it was, a project number. Now, it felt different. It's significant. With a surge of adrenaline, her fingers flew across the keypad, almost faster than she could think. 062214. There was a moment of silence. No triple beep. And then, with a heavy, satisfying thud, a solid metal bolt retracted inside the door. A soft green light illuminated the handle. It was open. For a long moment, Carol didn't move. She just stared at the handle, her heart pounding in her ears. A part of her was terrified of what she was about to find. The life she knew, the 30 years of memories, were on one side of this door. On the other side was the truth. And she knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that once she opened it, there was no going back. She could not unsee what was inside. She could not unknow the truth. This was the final, irrevocable step into the abyss. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she gripped the cold metal handle and pulled. The heavy door swung open with a quiet, well-oiled hiss. The inside of the safe was not what she expected. It wasn't filled with stacks of cash or sensitive corporate blueprints. It was a small, meticulously organized archive of a secret life. There were several neat stacks of documents, held together by rubber bands, and a small, leather-bound book tucked in the back. Her hands shaking, she reached for the first stack of papers on top. It was a collection of official-looking certificates. She pulled off the rubber band and looked at the first one. It was a birth certificate. Her eyes scanned the document, her mind struggling to process the information. Child's name, Thomas Blackwood Dubois. Date of birth, the 22nd of June, 2014. The date, the 22nd of June, 2014. The combination to the safe. The birth of this secret child was the key to his entire secret world. Her eyes moved to the parents' names. Father, Richard Dubois. And then, the name that made her blood run cold. Mother, Eliza Blackwood. Dubois. Blackwood. The name was familiar. It took her a moment to place it. Thomas Blackwood had been Richard's best friend in college, his first business partner, a kind, brilliant man who had died tragically young from cancer over a decade ago. And Eliza. Eliza had been his wife, his grieving widow, a woman Carol had consoled at the funeral, a woman she had sent sympathy cards to. Her mind reeled. This wasn't a simple affair. This was a betrayal of a depth she couldn't comprehend. He had had a child with his dead best friend's wife, a child who was now 8 years old. A child who shared a name with the man they had both betrayed. She felt a wave of nausea and had to grip the edge of the bookshelf to steady herself. She looked at the other documents. There was a second birth certificate, this one for Richard and herself, for their own son, Mark. He kept them together, a horrifying parallel accounting of his two families. Beneath that was a thick file of medical records. They were for Eliza. Carol's eyes scanned the diagnoses, the doctor's notes, the prescriptions. It was a long, sad history of a chronic, degenerative illness, an illness that had begun years ago. The final page was a death certificate. Eliza Blackwood Dubois had passed away just 6 months ago. So she, the woman whose opinion on his wedding ring mattered so much, was not a new, vibrant lover. She was the ghost of his first wife, his secret wife. But that didn't make any sense. He couldn't have 2 wives, could he? And then she saw the last item in the safe. The small, worn, leather-bound book tucked in the back. A diary. Richard's diary. Her hands were ice cold as she reached for it. This, she knew, would hold the final, horrifying answers. This would explain everything. She opened it to the first page, and with a sense of impending doom, she began to read. Carol sank to the floor of the office, the thick Persian rug doing little to soften the cold, hard reality that had just crashed down upon her. The documents were spread out around her like the wreckage of a plane crash. The 2 birth certificates, the grim medical reports, the finality of a death certificate. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion, a whirlwind of names and dates that refused to form a coherent picture. An affair with his best friend's widow was monstrous enough, but a secret child? And why did Eliza's death certificate list her surname as Dubois? It made no sense. The leather-bound diary in her hands felt unnaturally heavy, a repository of secrets that she was both terrified and desperate to unlock. She opened it to the first page, the date written in Richard's familiar confident script, the 12th of October, 2008. Eliza called today. The doctors have confirmed it. It's not just a passing illness. It's degenerative. They gave her a timeline. 10, maybe 15 years, they said. Each one a little worse than the last. She was so strong on the phone, trying to be brave for me, but I could hear the terror in her voice. My beautiful, vibrant Eliza. How am I supposed to watch her fade away? We've only been married for 2 years. Our life was just beginning. She made me promise not to tell anyone, not even my family. She doesn't want their pity. She wants to live what time she has with dignity. Carol's breath hitched. Married? For 2 years? In 2008, she and Richard had been married for almost 20 years. Her mind scrambled to make sense of the timeline. The words on the page were a denial of her entire reality. She frantically flipped forward, her eyes scanning for dates, for clues. She found an entry from a year later. Thomas is gone. The cancer took him so quickly. I stood at his funeral today, next to Carol, and I felt like the world's greatest monster. I watched her console Eliza, telling her what a wonderful man Thomas was, how much he would be missed. And Eliza just stood there, a ghost in a black dress, accepting the condolences of the woman whose husband she was secretly married to. This lie, it's going to eat me alive. But what choice do I have? Eliza is sick. She needs me. She needs my support, my insurance. I can't abandon her, but I can't leave Carol and the kids either. I love them. This is my home, so I will live 2 lives. I will be 2 men. I will carry this sin in silence until the very end. The truth was so much worse than a simple affair. It was a schism, a fundamental split in reality that he had maintained for years. Richard hadn't left his best friend's widow. Richard had married his best friend's wife before his friend had even passed away. The affair had been with her, with Carol. His entire 30-year marriage to her, the life they had built, the children they had raised, it was all the other life. She was the second wife, the secret family he had built while his real wife, his first wife, was slowly dying. The word bigamy echoed in her mind, a legal term that seemed too small, too clinical for the monumental scale of this deception. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had invalidated her entire existence. Their marriage wasn't just broken, it had never been real. She was not, and had never been, his legal wife. She kept reading, her eyes burning with unshed tears, a morbid curiosity compelling her to see the whole ugly picture. The diary entries chronicled his double life in meticulous, agonizing detail. There were entries about celebrating his anniversary with Eliza just weeks before celebrating his anniversary with Carol. There were entries about the guilt he felt buying Christmas presents for his children with Carol, knowing he had another life, another set of obligations that they knew nothing about. And then, 8 years ago, the entry that explained the combination to the safe. A miracle. In the midst of all this darkness, a small, impossible light. Eliza is pregnant. The doctors warned against it, said it would be too hard on her body, but she was insistent. She wanted to leave a piece of us behind, a piece of our love that would outlast her illness. I'm terrified. I'm overjoyed. How can I be a father to this child when I am a ghost in his life? But when I saw him, when I held Thomas Blackwood Dubois in my arms for the first time, all the fear melted away. He has my eyes. He has Eliza's smile. He is perfect. On this day, the 22nd of June, 2014, my son was born, and I have never felt a love or a guilt so profound. The diary explained everything. The missing ring wasn't taken off for a mistress. It was taken off because he couldn't bear the hypocrisy of wearing a symbol of his marriage to Carol when his real legal wife was at home, sick and needing him. The weekend business trips were his visits to Eliza and Thomas. The cash withdrawals were for their medical bills, for the child's expenses, for the upkeep of a life his other family could never know about. The final entries were the most painful. They chronicled Eliza's rapid decline in the last year, and her death just 6 months ago. She's gone. My Eliza is gone. The world is gray and colorless without her. Young Thomas is so lost. I am his only parent now. The secret feels heavier than ever. How can I continue this charade? But how can I stop? To tell Carol now, after all these years, would be to destroy her, to destroy our children. It would be a confession to a crime of the heart that has lasted for 3 decades. The lie has become my prison, and I don't know if I will ever be free. Carol finally closed the diary. The room was spinning. She felt a strange, hollow pity for the man in the diary, a man trapped by his own weakness and deceit. But that pity was quickly extinguished by the searing reality of her own situation. She was not his wife. Her children were not his legitimate heirs. Their entire life, their home, their history, was a sham, a carefully constructed lie built to protect him from the consequences of his own choices. He hadn't chosen her, he had simply added her. She looked at the documents spread around her on the floor, the evidence of her own non-existence. The anger returned, but it was different now. It was not the hot rage of a woman scorned. It was the cold, clear, and righteous fury of a woman whose entire identity had been stolen, and she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that this would not stand. He would not be allowed to keep his comfortable prison of lies. She would be the one to finally and permanently set him free. The initial, cataclysmic shock of the discovery left Carol feeling strangely numb, as if she were floating in a cold, empty void. The raw, searing pain was too immense to be processed all at once. Her mind, in an act of self-preservation, had shut down all emotion, leaving only a cold, stark, and brutally logical clarity. She was not a wife. She was the victim of a 30-year fraud. This was not a domestic dispute. It was a crime scene, and like a seasoned detective, she knew that her first and most important task was to secure the evidence. She did not weep. She did not scream. Her movements became slow, deliberate, and incredibly precise. She stood up, her legs shaky but determined, and walked back to the open safe. She looked at its contents not as a collection of personal betrayals, but as exhibits in the case of The State of Her Life versus Richard Dubois. She needed to preserve this truth, to own it, before he could return and make it disappear forever. Her first thought was to take everything, to pack the diary, the certificates, the medical files into a bag and flee, but she quickly dismissed the idea. That was the action of a panicked victim. She was not a victim anymore. She was the prosecutor. To simply take the documents would alert him that his secret was out, giving him time to prepare a defense, to spin a new web of lies. No, the documents had to stay where they were. But their truth had to be hers to control. She walked out of the office and went to her art studio, a small, sunlit room at the back of the house. It was her sanctuary, a place of creation and peace. Now it would be her war room. From a drawer, she retrieved her high-resolution digital camera, the one she used to photograph her students' artwork. She took out the memory card and inserted a new, empty one. She also grabbed a pair of soft, white cotton gloves, the kind she used when handling delicate prints. She would not leave a single trace of her investigation. Returning to the office, she slipped on the gloves. The act felt strangely ceremonial, the donning of a uniform. She began the painstaking process of documenting everything. She laid each document, one by one, on the dark wood of Richard's desk, using his desk lamp to ensure the lighting was perfect. She photographed the birth certificate of Thomas Blackwood Dubois, ensuring every word, every date, every official seal was crystal clear. She photographed the birth certificate of her own son, Mark, placing them side by side for a devastating comparison shot. She then moved on to the medical files of Eliza Blackwood Dubois. She photographed the initial diagnosis, the doctor's grim prognosis, the long list of prescriptions, and finally, the stark finality of the death certificate. Each click of the camera's shutter was a small, satisfying act of reclamation. She was taking back the truth, 1 megapixel at a time. Finally, she came to the diary. This was the most crucial piece of evidence, the confession from the mouth of the perpetrator himself. She couldn't just photograph a few pages, she had to document it all. She set up the camera on a small tripod, positioning it directly over the desk. And for the next 2 hours, she meticulously photographed every single page of Richard's diary, from the first entry detailing Eliza's diagnosis to the last guilt-ridden entry after her death. She made sure each page was perfectly flat, perfectly lit, perfectly legible. It was a slow, grueling process, forcing her to reread every lie, every betrayal, but she did it with the detached focus of an archivist preserving a historical record. The historical record of his sin. When she was finished, she had hundreds of high-resolution digital files, a perfect, undeniable, and portable archive of his entire secret life. She ejected the memory card from the camera and held it in the palm of her gloved hand. It was so small, so light, yet it contained the weight of 30 years of deception. It was the truth, distilled into a tiny, powerful object. She then, with the same meticulous care, placed every single document back into the safe in the exact order she had found them. She put the diary back in its place in the corner. She closed the heavy steel door, spun the dial, and heard the satisfying thud of the bolt locking back into place. She wiped the keypad and the handle clean. She returned the camera to her studio. She left no trace. To Richard, when he returned, his secret vault would appear untouched, his lies still safely locked away. He would have no idea that the walls of his prison had already been breached, and that the warden now held the key. With the memory card safely in her pocket, Carol finally felt a new kind of power surge through her. The shock and numbness were gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. The question was no longer, what happened? The question was now, what do I do with this truth? The power to destroy him, to expose him to the world, was now hers. But destruction was not her goal. Justice was. She knew she could not face this alone. This was bigger than a marital dispute. It involved legal questions of bigamy, of fraud, of inheritance. It involved her children, and the innocent child named Thomas. She needed an ally, a professional. She thought of her daughter, Lisa, who was a brilliant corporate lawyer in the city. But she couldn't put this burden on her children. Not yet. This was her battle to prepare. She needed someone objective, someone who could see the situation without the filter of love and pain. She went to her computer and began to search. Not for a divorce lawyer. The word divorce felt too small, too normal for this situation. She searched for the best, most formidable, most feared family law and estate litigation attorney in the state. She found a name, a woman named Eleanor Vance, known as the Velvet Hammer. for her combination of polished, sophisticated courtroom presence and her ruthless, take-no-prisoners approach to litigation. Carol looked at the powerful, intelligent face of the woman on the website, and for the first time since Richard had uttered the word she, Carol felt a flicker of something that was not pain or anger. It was hope, the hope of a woman who had just found her weapon. She picked up the phone, her hand steady, and she made the call to schedule a consultation. The trial of Richard Dubois had begun, and he didn't even know he had been indicted. The week that followed was the strangest and most difficult of Carol's life. She lived a phantom existence in her own home, a ghost haunting the hallways of a 30-year marriage that she now knew was a fraud. Richard had not yet returned. He sent a few curt, impersonal text messages, "Still need some space. Work is crazy. Talk soon." To which she did not reply. The silence was a blessing. It gave her time. Time to grieve for the life she had lost, and time to prepare for the life she was about to reclaim. Her meeting with Eleanor Vance, the Velvet Hammer, was everything she had hoped it would be. The lawyer was a formidable, sharp-witted woman who listened to Carol's entire, unbelievable story without a flicker of surprise, her expression a mask of professional calm. Carol had plugged the small memory card into the lawyer's laptop, and together they had scrolled through the hundreds of photos of Richard's diary entries and the official documents. When they were finished, Eleanor Vance had leaned back in her chair, a look of cold, professional fury in her eyes. "In my 30 years of practicing law, Mrs. Dubois," she had said, "I have seen a great deal of deceit, but this is a masterpiece of fraud. He didn't just break the law, he broke the very concept of a family. We are not going to file for divorce. We are going to have this entire 30-year sham annulled. We are going to erase him." The lawyer's words were a balm to Carol's wounded soul. She finally had an ally, a powerful one. But before she could unleash the legal storm, there was one more, far more painful, task she had to perform. She could not, would not, let her children be blindsided by a public legal filing. They deserved to hear the truth from her, in the safety of their own home. They deserved the chance to process the devastation before it became a matter of public record. She knew it would be the hardest conversation of her life. She was about to destroy their childhood, to tell them that the father they loved and respected was a phantom, a lie. She called them both on a Thursday evening. Mark, her steady and practical son, a successful engineer, and Lisa, her fiery and compassionate daughter, a brilliant lawyer in her own right. She kept her voice calm and level. "I need you both to come over to the house on Saturday morning," she said. "Just the three of us. It's important. It's about your father and me." The gravity in her tone left no room for questions. They both agreed immediately, their voices laced with a concerned curiosity. Saturday morning arrived, a bright, sunny day that was cruelly at odds with the darkness that was about to descend. Carol prepared for their arrival as if she were preparing for a state funeral. She made a fresh pot of coffee. She set out some pastries she knew they liked. She wanted to cushion the blow with the familiar comforts of home, a final, futile gesture of maternal protection. They arrived together, their faces etched with worry. "Mom, what is this? What's wrong?" Lisa asked, rushing to hug her. "Is Dad okay?" "Your father is fine," Carol said, her voice steady. "Please, sit down." She led them to the dining room table, the very table where they had shared thousands of family meals, where Richard had carved the Thanksgiving turkey every year. She let them sit, let the silence build for a moment, and then she began. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She spoke with the calm, methodical precision of a historian delivering a lecture, laying out the facts of her discovery, one devastating piece at a time. She told them about the anniversary dinner, about the question, about his chilling, casual answer. She saw the shock and disbelief in their eyes. "He was probably just joking, Mom," Mark said, ever the logical one, trying to find a rational explanation. "You know how he gets after a glass of wine." "I thought so too at first," Carol replied, "but it led me to his safe." And then she laid out the evidence. She had printed out the most crucial documents on high-quality paper. She slid the 2 birth certificates across the polished wood of the table. "This," she said, tapping the first one, "is yours, Mark. And this, she tapped the second, belongs to your half-brother Thomas, who was born 8 years ago. The word half-brother hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. Lisa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark just stared, his face pale, his mind visibly struggling to comprehend the information. What are you talking about? Half-brother? Who is Eliza Blackwood? She was your father's wife, Carol said quietly. Was? Lisa whispered, her lawyer's brain kicking in. Was she his wife before you? Dad was a widower and never told us? No, Carol said, delivering the final, catastrophic blow. She was his wife during me. They married in 2008. She passed away 6 months ago. Your father is a bigamist. And our entire marriage, your entire lives, have been a lie. She then gave them the printed excerpts from the diary. She watched as her children read their father's own words, describing his secret wedding to Eliza, the birth of their secret son, and the calculated 30-year deception he had perpetrated against all of them. She watched as their initial shock gave way to a dawning, horrified understanding, and then, finally, to a deep and righteous fury. Lisa was the first to speak, her voice trembling with a lawyer's cold rage. This is fraud. This is a level of calculated sociopathic deceit that is almost unbelievable. He didn't just cheat on you, Mom. He invalidated our entire existence. Are we even his legal children? You are, Carol said, her heart aching for them. But our marriage is not, and has never been, legal. Mark, who had been silent, finally looked up from the diary pages, his face a mask of stone. The love and admiration he had always held for his father had been burned away, leaving only the ashes of betrayal. He's a monster, he said, his voice low and guttural. He is a stranger. I don't have a father. In that moment, sitting around their family table, they were no longer a family in the way they had once been. They were 3 survivors, huddled together in the wreckage of a life they had thought was real. The tribunal had been held, the verdict was unanimous, and the man they had once called husband and father had been found guilty of the ultimate betrayal. The rest of that Saturday passed in a blur of shared grief and strategic planning. The dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. Carol was no longer a lone victim. She was the head of a unified front. Her children, their initial shock hardening into a protective, furious loyalty, rallied around her. Lisa, the lawyer, immediately began to analyze the legal ramifications, her mind sharp and focused. Annulment is the right call, Mom, she stated, her voice firm. We don't just want to end the marriage, we want to legally declare that it never existed. It's a statement of truth. Mark, the engineer, was practical. He started making lists, dealing with the logistics. We need to freeze the joint accounts immediately, he said, his voice cold. He cannot be allowed to move another cent. They were no longer just her children. They were her allies, her generals in the war she had been forced to declare. They decided he could not be allowed to return to the house. Not now, not ever. This was her home, their childhood home, and he had forfeited his right to be in it. The call was made to Richard late that afternoon. It was Mark who did it, his voice devoid of all warmth and affection, the voice of a son speaking to a stranger. You need to come to the house, he said, his tone flat and non-negotiable. Now, we need to have a family meeting. Richard, on the other end of the line, was clearly taken aback. He had expected Carol to be in a state of tearful despair, not mobilizing their children against him. A meeting? What's this all about, son? Is your mother all right? He asked, a hint of patronizing concern in his voice. She's fine, Mark said coldly. Just be here in an hour. We have things to discuss. And he hung up, leaving no room for argument. The hour that followed was the longest of Carol's life. The 3 of them sat in the living room, the pile of evidence laid out on the coffee table like a sacred, terrible altar. They did not speak. They just waited, a united, silent tribunal, for the accused to arrive. When Richard finally walked through the front door, he was wearing a confident, slightly annoyed expression. He had clearly prepared a speech, a narrative where he was the misunderstood, complex man who had been forced into a difficult situation. He was ready to manage his wife's emotions, to placate his children with a story of his own making. He was not prepared for the reality that awaited him. He stopped dead in the entryway. The sight of his 2 adult children, sitting on either side of their mother, their faces like stone, their eyes burning with a cold, unfamiliar fire, immediately shattered his composure. This was not the scene he had expected. This was an intervention, an ambush. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice losing its confident edge. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" No one answered. Carol just gestured, with a quiet, deliberate movement of her hand, to the coffee table, to the birth certificates, to the diary. Richard's eyes followed her gesture. He saw the open diary, his own handwriting exposed under the lamplight. He saw the official documents, laid out in a neat, damning row. The color drained from his face. The blood seemed to turn to ice in his veins. The carefully constructed walls of his 30-year life crumbled to dust in a single, silent, horrifying moment. He looked from the evidence to the faces of his children, and in their eyes he saw not anger, not sadness, but a complete and utter revulsion. He was a stranger to them. "How?" he whispered, his voice a dry, rattling sound. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how, Dad," Lisa said, her voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "It only matters that we know. We know everything. We know about Eliza. We know about Thomas. We know that our entire life, our entire family, is a disgusting, fraudulent lie you constructed to satisfy your own selfish needs." "It wasn't like that," he stammered, his mind scrambling, searching for an excuse, a new lie to cover the old one. "It was complicated. I loved her. I loved your mother. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "You didn't want to hurt anyone?" Mark's voice was a low, dangerous growl. He stood up, and for the first time in his life, he was a physically imposing presence to his father. "You let Mom live a lie for 30 years. You let us grow up believing we were your only family. You betrayed your best friend. You had another son, a brother we never knew, and you let him grow up without us, without his own father in his life full time. Every single person in this story has been hurt by you. The only person you didn't want to hurt was yourself." Richard shrank back from the raw fury in his son's voice. He looked at Carol, his eyes pleading, searching for the soft, forgiving woman he had always known. "Carol, please," he begged. "We can fix this. Don't let this destroy us." Carol looked at him, and for the first time, she felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not even pity. Just a profound and final emptiness. "There is no us, Richard," she said, her voice calm and clear. "There never was. The us you are referring to was never legally real. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow to discuss the terms of the annulment." The word annulment hit him like a physical blow. It was the final erasure. "No," he whispered. "Carol, you can't." "I can," she said. "And I will." She stood up, a signal that the meeting was over. "Mark and Lisa will help you pack a bag with your immediate essentials. You need to be out of this house in 1 hour. The rest of your things will be sent to you. You are no longer welcome here." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him to face the judgment of the children he had created and betrayed. His punishment was not financial. Not yet. It was something far worse. It was the complete and total loss of the love and respect of his own children. It was the verdict of the family tribunal. And the sentence was exile. The hour that followed Richard's exile was a strange and surreal whirlwind of activity. There were no tears. The time for weeping was over. Now was the time for action. Under Carol's quiet, steady direction, she and her children moved through the house with a grim, purposeful efficiency, not as a grieving family, but as a coordinated team executing a necessary but painful demolition. Mark, his face a mask of cold fury, went into his father's closet and began methodically packing a suitcase, his movements precise and economical. He packed a week's worth of suits, shirts, and essentials, his jaw tight with a rage so profound it had burned past the point of shouting and settled into a hard, silent resolve. Lisa, the lawyer, was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice a calm, professional staccato as she spoke with the family's bank, issuing instructions to freeze all joint assets and credit cards. cutting off Richard's access to the financial empire he had used to fund his secret life. Carol, meanwhile, did not participate in the packing. She could not bring herself to touch his things. They felt like artifacts from a stranger's life. Instead, she performed a different kind of exorcism. She walked through the house room by room and began to remove him. She took down the large, formal portrait of the two of them that hung in the living room. She packed away the smaller, framed photos of him that sat on the mantelpiece and the end tables. She was not erasing their history, not the good parts, not the memories of the father her children had loved. She was simply removing the icon of the lie, creating a space where they could begin to breathe a new, cleaner air, free from the suffocating presence of his 30-year deception. When the hour was up, Richard was gone. Mark had placed the packed suitcase by the front door, and Richard had taken it and left without another word, a broken, defeated man walking out into the ruins of his own making. The silence he left behind was different from the silence of the night before. It was not a lonely, aching silence. It was a clean, quiet, and profoundly peaceful one. It was the silence of a fever that had finally broken. The days that followed were filled with the grim logistics of untangling a 30-year life. Meetings with Eleanor Vance, the formidable lawyer, became their new routine. Lisa worked alongside her, a brilliant and ferocious advocate for her mother. They filed the petition for annulment, a legal declaration that the marriage had been a fraud from its inception. They began the complex process of forensic accounting, tracing the decades of financial bleed from their family to his secret one. But amidst the cold, hard mechanics of the law, Carol's mind was increasingly occupied by a different, more human problem. The boy, Thomas, her son's half-brother. A child who was not just a piece of evidence in their case, but an innocent victim, a boy who had just lost his mother and was now about to lose the only father he had ever known, at least in the way he had known him. She thought of him, an 8-year-old child, suddenly caught in the crossfire of an adult war he could not possibly understand, and her heart, the heart of a mother and a teacher, ached for him. One afternoon, she spoke to her own children about it. "We need to think about Thomas," she said, her voice soft but firm. Mark, still raw with anger, scoffed. "Let him worry about Thomas," he said, the word him dripping with contempt. "That's his mess, not ours." "He is an innocent child, Mark," Carol replied gently. "He is your brother. He didn't ask for any of this. He is a victim here, just as we are. We cannot, in good conscience, allow him to be punished for the sins of his father." Lisa, whose legal mind was already considering the boy's welfare, nodded in agreement. "Mom's right. Legally and morally, we need to make sure he's protected." And so, Carol made the most difficult and compassionate decision of her new life. She asked Eleanor Vance to reach out, not to Richard, but to the legal guardian who had presumably been appointed for Thomas after Eliza's death. She wanted to open a line of communication. She wanted to make sure the boy was okay, and she wanted to meet him. The meeting was arranged for a neutral location, a quiet park halfway between their homes. Carol went with Lisa. She saw the boy from a distance, a small, sad-looking child with Richard's dark, curly hair, sitting on a park bench next to a kind-faced woman who must have been his aunt. He looked lost, confused. Carol approached slowly, her heart pounding. This was the living embodiment of her husband's greatest betrayal, and yet all she felt when she looked at him was a profound sense of compassion. She sat down on the bench, not next to him, but a respectful distance away. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. "My name is Carol. I knew your father and your mother." The boy just looked at her, his eyes wide and wary. He didn't speak. Carol didn't push. She just sat there, in the quiet afternoon sunlight, and began to talk. She told him a story. A story about a funny, kind man named Arthur, who had been his father's best friend. She told him about his mother, Eliza, about her beautiful smile and her fierce intelligence. She didn't talk about the lies. She didn't talk about the betrayal. She just talked about the good things, the true things, trying to give him a piece of his history that wasn't tainted by the poison of his father's deceit. It was a beginning. Not an absolution for Richard, but a recognition that the consequences of his actions had created a new, broken family, and it was up to the survivors, the ones with the moral strength, to begin the slow, painful process of piecing it back together, not into the shape it once was, but into something new, something honest. The legal battle in the end was not a battle at all. It was a complete and total surrender. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence, the diary, the birth certificates, the decades of financial records, and confronted with the cold, unified front of his wife and the children he had alienated, Richard crumbled. He did not contest the annulment. He did not fight for a share of the assets he had already spent decades secretly draining. He simply signed the papers, a broken, diminished man, and faded into a self-imposed exile. The 30-year marriage of Carol and Richard Dubois was officially, legally, and morally erased from existence, declared a nullity, a fraud from its inception. Carol, with the full support of her children, was generous in the settlement, but not to him. She established a secure, legally protected trust fund for Thomas, his secret son. The fund would provide for his education and his future, ensuring that the boy, the most innocent victim in this entire tragedy, would not have to pay the price for his father's sins. It was an act of pure grace, a final, quiet testament to the kind of woman she was. She never saw Richard again. She heard, through the grapevine, that he had moved to a small, coastal town, living a quiet, anonymous life, a man haunted by the ghosts of the two families he had destroyed. For Carol, the months that followed were a period of quiet, profound rediscovery. The beautiful suburban house, once a symbol of her perfect life, now felt like a museum of a lie. It was too big, too full of ghosts. With her children's help, she sold it. She didn't buy another house. Instead, she found a beautiful, light-filled loft apartment in the city's arts district, a place with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and a stunning view of the skyline. It was a space that was entirely, unapologetically hers. She began to paint again. For the first time in years, she wasn't just teaching art, she was creating it. She filled the empty white walls of her new home with large, vibrant, abstract canvases, full of the color and emotion that she had suppressed for so long. Her children, when they visited, were amazed. They saw a side of their mother they had never known, a passionate, independent, and brilliantly talented artist. The quiet, supportive wife and mother was still there, but she was now integrated with a powerful, creative force that had finally been given the space to breathe. Her relationship with her children, forged in the fire of that terrible truth, became stronger and more honest than ever before. They no longer saw her as just mom, a comfortable, predictable part of the family furniture. They saw her as Carol, a woman of incredible strength, resilience, and grace. They spoke on the phone every day, not out of obligation, but out of a deep, newfound respect and friendship. And then there was Thomas. The connection they forged was slow, tentative, but incredibly precious. Every few weeks, Carol and Lisa would meet him and his aunt at the park. They never tried to replace his mother. They simply became a quiet, steady presence in his life. They brought him books. Carol, the art teacher, taught him how to draw. Lisa, the lawyer, helped him with his homework. They became his family, not as a replacement for the one he had lost, but as an expansion of it. One day, a year after the annulment, as Carol was pushing him on a swing, he looked at her and asked, "Can I call you Grandma Carol?" The simple question was a gift, a moment of grace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. In the ashes of her husband's betrayal, a new, unexpected, and beautiful family was beginning to grow. Her life was not the one she had planned for 30 years ago. It was smaller, in some ways, quieter, but it was also infinitely more real. It was a life built not on a comforting illusion, but on a hard one, sometimes painful, but ultimately liberating truth. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself, and she had gained a new grandson. It was a trade, she often thought to herself as she stood on her balcony, looking out at the city lights, that she would make again in a heartbeat. The gentle, uplifting music swells, then fades to a soft hum as Mama Bea's voice becomes more direct, speaking to the listener, a final lesson from one wise woman to another. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? That the life, the history you trust, could be a story written by someone else, a fiction designed to keep you comfortable and quiet. Carol's story is a story of a devastating betrayal, yes, but it is also a story of a profound and powerful awakening. She was forced to become the archaeologist of her own life, to dig through the layers of lies to find the truth buried beneath. And in finding that truth, she didn't just find pain, she found freedom. The freedom to build a new life, a new family, a new future, on a foundation that was finally, truly, her own. So I leave you with this question. What is the foundation of your own house built upon? Is it built on the solid rock of truth, no matter how difficult that truth may be? Or are there cracks, small compromises, unspoken lies that threaten to bring it all down one day? Share your thoughts, your wisdom, with our community in the comments below. Your story, your truth, might just be the light that helps someone else find their way out of the dark. Thank you, as always, for listening.